Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to what is the final lecture in this course. So we've already had a look at 17 different letters, and this is the 18th letter, the 6th formal letter, and the final letter of the course. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. It looks like quite a simple task to finish us off, but we should know by now to be cautious around the simple ones in particular. You missed an important meeting at work. Write a letter to your manager. In the letter, apologize for not attending, explain why you did not attend, and say what you will do to make up for it. So, on the surface, quite simple. It's not like the previous letter in which we had lots and lots of features to reference. Instead, what we have here is a task which is rather bare bones. Of course, we'll still need to highlight the keywords. Won't take us very long. Let's do that here. So you missed an important meeting at work. I would not begrudge you if you did not highlight the keywords here, particularly at the top. It's hard to really miss the keywords. It's really the whole thing. But it's just good to do out of habit, to practice the habit of doing so. Now we're writing a letter to the manager, to our manager really, apologizing for not being there, for not attending, and then we're explaining why that happened. So explain why you did not attend, and then say what you will do to make up for it. And this part at the end here, what you will do to make up for it, along with the previous two bullet points as well, should give a very clear indication as to the purpose of the letter. Of course, we know we're dealing with a formal letter because we're writing to a manager at work. Maybe it doesn't seem so obvious to you that we're writing a formal letter because in the semi-formal section, we also had a letter at work which we wrote in a semi-formal tone. But notice that that was to a colleague and we were working on the same project. There's a lot of back and forth letters that go between colleagues, but particularly when you're writing to a superior, you are almost always going to need to write in a formal tone. So the formal tone is appropriate here, particularly because it's also an apology letter. So we could see this should be quite clear here. Apology, apologize for not attending, what you're going to do to make up for it, etc. So it seems here that we're finishing on a relatively simple task. However, as we've mentioned before, the thing about supposedly simple tasks is that we then have to come up with more content. We're not given as much content, so we have to imagine it. We have to come up with the ideas ourselves. So what we will do, I think in this one, is we will only do a P1, a P2 and P3. And the reason that I'm changing it from the usual P1, P2, P3, P4 instead of 4 paragraphs, just 3, is because notice that first bullet point, apologize for not attending. Now, if you imagine what your typical purpose sentence would be, it would be, I am writing to apologize for not attending. So we don't want to repeat ourselves, and so it makes sense to combine that all into the first paragraph. We will write the purpose and then expand on that within the first paragraph. So of course we're going to apologize for not attending. How can we extend this paragraph? This is the tricky thing here. We're not given much information, but of course we need to write more than a sentence. I apologize for not attending. So you'll have to come up with some ideas. Maybe for us, remember, formal letter, we want to be as detailed as possible. So we can give the details of the meeting regarding maybe the date, the time, etc. So we'll add that in there. And then we need to be careful here not to explain right now why we didn't go. So it's quite tempting to explain straight away why we weren't there, but notice that that is for the second paragraph, not the first. So I think here we'll just say why we're so sorry. And that might be because we are disappointed in ourselves, or that the company itself has high standards for punctuality and attendance. So we'll just write here high standards. That will give us the idea moving forward, and then we can expand on that, turn it into a nicely developed sentence. And then we can explain why we didn't attend. So we've paused, we've waited, now we can do that. Okay, the first thing I want to think about is, again, we're not trying to excuse ourselves. We're not giving an excuse, but we're just giving an explanation. So maybe another apology before we start, and then we jump into it. And perhaps, there's plenty of things you could think about here. For me, in this digital age we live in, I will probably go something like my digital calendar, or let's say my office calendar did not sync with my personal calendar. So office calendar problem, let's say something like that. And then I'll turn that into a well-developed paragraph a bit later. Remember, I'm going to start by repeating my apology. That's one sentence, and then the next sentence be specific about what happened. And then what you will do to make up for it. We've looked at this in a previous letter, making up for something, showing, taking action to demonstrate the sincerity of your apology, and to make the other person feel like the scales are balanced, feel like you've really done enough to apologize. So in this case, we're looking at the topic of work, the topic of a meeting. So it makes sense that we say something like that we're going to do unpaid overtime to make up for it. And again, we can hopefully develop that idea when we get down there. So it's sort of slim on the details here and slim on the task requirements itself. So it could be a bit tricky, but if we stick with it, you should see that we don't really need to panic. We just need to keep fleshing out ideas as we go through. But the important thing is that you actually have some ideas to begin with. So that planning aspect of task 1, now that we're coming to the end of the course, it's just a reminder, just to re-emphasize the point that planning, it is still important. It shouldn't really take you more than a few minutes, so then you can move into the task itself. But it's very useful just to prevent yourself from stopping in the middle of the task, running out of ideas. This can prevent that from happening. And making sure that you address all the task requirements itself. That partly comes through the highlighting of keywords. We saw how important that is, and particularly in the last lecture. Okay, so who are we going to write to here? I'm imagining in this case that we know the boss's name. I'm not imagining it's likely that we know the boss's name. So we'll say, "Dear Mr. Sharp," for example. And then, as usual, sort of a purpose sentence. We are combining it with the rest of the paragraph, but we still want that clear purpose before anything else. So I'm writing to apologize, or even better, I'm writing to formally apologize. And what this means, what this suggests, is that we may have actually apologized in person already, maybe over the phone, or we've spoken to the manager. Formally apologize, we're putting it in writing. It's important for the records, for the business records. What are we apologizing for? Well, we're writing to formally apologize for not attending. You might also write being absent for, but I would prefer to look at it as a negative in this case, because we're trying to say something bad has happened. So not attending seems more appropriate, even though it's in the task itself. You could also say, of course, missing the meeting, but yeah, not attending is okay. Okay, let's just add some adjectives in here to flesh this out. The scheduled company meeting, and then we want the details as we've written in the plan. Let's imagine the meeting was on Friday, 12th of March, and then the time. And the best thing here is to use that 24-hour clock rather than a 1:30 p.m. More appropriate in a formal setting to use that 24-hour clock. 13:30. Yeah, I think that's sufficient in terms of detail. And then we'll write that sentence about high standards. So a nice collocation here is to use holds, the verb holds, reflexively, and join that to the noun standards. So the company, or this company, holds itself, reflexive, to the highest standards. Notice that preposition as well, it's to, it holds itself to particular standards. And the highest standards, again, nice collocation, adjective noun. Holds itself to the highest standards, and then in terms of what? So particularly, it holds itself to all higher standards across the boards, but particularly in terms of what are we talking about here? Missing a meeting, what does that relate to? It relates to attendance, relates to punctuality. So let's put both of those in here. So punctuality, being on time, attendance, just being there. So particularly in terms of punctuality and attendance. So why does that matter? Why are we talking about this? This is why we are particularly regretful. Might be some nice language to use here in an apology letter. So, and I am afraid that, you've probably seen this expression before numerous times. I'm afraid that, basically, I'm sorry that, it's a shame that this has happened. I'm afraid that on this occasion, so just this occasion, perhaps it hasn't happened before, on this occasion, now instead of saying I regret that, I'm going to use the adverb instead, which is regretfully. I regretfully did not. Now what is the collocation? The verb that collocates with standards. Do you get standards? Do you achieve standards? You might say achieve standards in some cases, but in this case we want meet, the verb meet. You did not reach those particular criteria that was set. So you did not meet those standards. You weren't quite good enough. And then that's fine. And we've got lots of nice apology language in here. I am afraid, I regretfully did not, writing to formally apologize, etc. So lots and lots of nice apology language to begin with. It's very clear purpose and nice purpose-related vocabulary and topic-related vocabulary, because we're talking about work quite clearly as well. Then we want to move into an explanation of why we didn't attend. And remember that I said we don't want to excuse ourselves, we just want to explain. So to emphasize that point, I'm going to use more apology language. But we're going to start with a subordinated conjunction. We're going to use although, because there's going to be a sense of contrast here. It's like, I just want to explain, but at the same time I do apologize still. So although I apologize, and here's some nice apology language, unreservedly. It's the adverb here. I apologize unreservedly for this. What is the noun of absent? It would be absence, so not being there. I apologize unreservedly for my not being there. And then when we come to the end of that dependent clause, comma, let's create a complex sentence with an independent clause, comma, why are we creating this complex sentence? So we want to apologize, but we also want to explain. That's why there's a contrast there. I would like to, you could say explain. I'm going to go with make you aware of the conditions which led to, now this is a bit tricky because I might want to write to this absence or that absence that I've mentioned, but I'd rather not repeat the word absence within a single sentence. So instead, I'm going to go with this, its occurrence. So the absence occurring. So this absence occurred. I want to explain why it occurred, why it happened. But you wouldn't say it's happening, so you would say its occurrence. Although I apologize unreservedly for this absence, I would like to make you aware of the conditions which led to its occurrence. That's a nice way, in a very formal setting, of explaining why something bad happened, explaining why you have done something that needs an apology. Okay, a nice way to begin this explanation, not excuse, it would appear that. So this suggests, the use of the language here suggests that we have worked out, or we have discovered that something happened, but it wasn't clear to us at the time. It wasn't obvious at the time. But now, looking back, this is what seems to have happened. So appear, similar to seem here. It would appear that, let's say my online, again, so we want to move into this sort of digital age language here, online office calendar, and as I mentioned before, did not sink. Now be careful with the spelling there, very different to the verb sink as in go underwater, which is S-I-N-K. This is S-Y-N-C. Did not sink with my personal mobile calendar. And just in case you're unaware, that verb sync, I guess it really means that the information was shared between those two things, and that information matches up on each device. So the meeting online office calendar the information on that did not match up to the mobile calendar as it should have. There's probably a piece of software that's supposed to work and sync those two pieces of information, but in this case it didn't work. Okay, now why does that matter? Why does it matter? Why is he not checking his online office calendar anyway? Well, probably because on that particular morning he was not at work. So let's make that clear. So and notice the comma here because I'm moving to a different point. I'm leaving behind the idea of the calendar and I'm moving on to a different point that I'm trying to communicate here. And as I had officially booked that particular morning off of work to complete a personal errand, task, essentially a task just for yourself. Notice the language here as well, very formal. It's not saying, and as I took that morning off to do some personal stuff. We've got very formal language appropriate for a company setting, a business setting, a formal setting. And notice the order here, because I'm starting with the as, I put this comma here as well, and then we close the comma when we come to the end of that point, the end of that point that we're trying to communicate, and then carry on. This meant I was not, let's say, reminded. Notice the voice here and the tense. We have the passive past, so the past simple in the passive voice. I was not reminded by the online office calendar or the personal calendar of the upcoming meeting, and it's upcoming at the time that we're supposed to be reminded. Bear in mind, it's a bit confusing because of the back and forth of times here, of the upcoming meeting, until now notice the tense switch here again. I had returned to the office. Okay, so we have the past simple in the passive voice here because this happened, or in this case did not happen, after this happened. So you can imagine a timeline. The first thing is that we return to the office, and then after that we're supposed to be reminded of the meeting, but we're not because of the problem with the calendar. But you can see that the further event in the past, the furthest back event in the past will be the past perfect, and an event after that that's still in the past, but after that previous event will then be in the past simple. A good hint as to when you might need to use the past perfect is the preposition until. Not all the time, but if you're using until, you can consider, do I need the past perfect here? Yes, the past perfect. So in that case, it is appropriate. So we've got some nice grammatical complexity here. And then we'll just follow it off with at which point it was too late. So the point of being reminded or not reminded, it's then too late because we weren't reminded. So we've switched them back into the past simple. So notice that incredibly complex sentence with lots of different clauses in here, lots of different time references, lots of nice work vocabulary as well. So there's plenty going on here, but all written in a very formal tone as well. The vocabulary is appropriate. Hopefully that's a sentence you could keep up with. I do think that you know, if you're looking at this course and you've made it this far, although they may look that may look like quite a complicated sentence, it could be one that you're capable of. I'm sure there will probably be a couple of mistakes in it, but on the whole, you should be able to write a sentence like that and communicate it in a way which can be understood with hopefully the appropriate tenses as well, despite maybe a couple of vocabulary or preposition mistakes. So, nice big paragraph there. That's quite useful because we don't have much content to work with. So we can now move into the final paragraph, and we don't have to worry about writing this really long paragraph explaining what we're going to do to make up for it, because we've already included quite a lot of content in the previous paragraph. So we are saying what we're going to do to make up for it. Let's make it very clear at the beginning what the purpose of this paragraph is. Let's go with an in order to. And instead of make up for it, now make up for it is slightly less formal. You could get away with it in a semi-formal letter, certainly in an informal letter. But in a formal letter, perhaps, but I think we can do a bit better. I'm going to say recompense the company. It's like pay the company back. But in this case, we mean it in terms of an apology and what action we're going to take to demonstrate the sincerity of the apology. So in order to recompense the company for the lost time, so the time which has been lost, you also might say, I have noticed the switch in tense here that I'm going to make as well. This is not present simple, it's not I own or I possess, it's I have undertaken. So present perfect here. Instead of I have done or I have chosen, I have undertaken. It's nice formal vocabulary, good for businesses, good for business letters. And then I want to make it clear that it's choosing to do so. It's not being forced to. So I'm going to say I have voluntarily. So notice the adverb there. I have voluntarily undertaken how much over time? Let's say an extra, I don't know, 6 hours. We should write that in letters here because it's anything under 12. You should really write in letters. Extra 6 hours of, and we want to be very clear here, unpaid, just like we've mentioned in the plan. So we haven't asked for pay and we've chosen to do it of our own accord. Overtime this week. So lots of nice topic related vocabulary related to the business, recompense, company, undertaken, unpaid overtime, lots and lots going on there, all formal. Now let's finish it off with a nice sentence that could probably be used in a number of business related formal apology letters. I hope that this demonstrates, I've already said this a couple of times, so you may see where I'm going here, the sincerity of my apology. And here we're showing our ability to use word formation as well. We've got apologize a couple of times. Now we're moving on to the noun apology. But please let me know, this is typical for a lot of letters, if you would like to discuss this. You could just say discuss this further, even better, discuss this matter, this issue. So again, just adds another nice layer, another nice formal sounding vocabulary here, another nice formal sounding word to the letter. And then I think that's actually okay. Let's have a look at the word count here. And yeah, it's a little bit long. So despite the fact that we ended up with a plan that was quite short on detail and certainly a task that was short on information to include, we've managed to extend it partly by being very detailed about the explanation, but we took that challenge and turned it into an opportunity to include a range of different time references and switch through a number of tenses and create a very complex sentence in the middle there. That's certainly something of a band 9 score, but as I said, even if you're at a band 7 level or hoping to achieve it, you should be able to write something like that, even if it includes a few mistakes inside it. You should be able to communicate, on the whole, you should be able to communicate the times and what has happened with a sense of clarity. It should be able to be understood. And then we'll just finish off the letter with, by now you should know, yours sincerely, because we know the name, we've written the name of the recipient, and then of course a full name. Let's go with John Peters at the end there. And that will be that. So that is our final letter, and we looked at one more formal letter. In this case, it was in a business setting. and the purpose was an apology, specifically for missing a meeting. So lots of nice topic-related vocabulary, lots of nice purpose-related vocabulary, a great range of grammatical complexity, particularly in the time references, some nice openings to each of the paragraphs to demonstrate coherence and cohesion, and we've covered, relatively easy to do in this case, but we've covered all of the task requirements, all of the bullet point directives with an appropriate tone and a clear purpose. So all of those, each 4 of those band descriptor categories being covered as usual. So I'll leave you to do the final vocabulary exercises and to have a look at the last quiz. And of course, do make sure that you check out all the quizzes in the course. They should help to consolidate what you've learned over the course of this course. Of course, there are other courses that you can check out as well. I'll leave links to those with some discount codes in the bonus lecture. So I recommend that you check that out as well. And as always, if you have any questions at all, please get in touch via the Q&A that Udemy offers, and I will get back in touch with you to answer any queries you might have. Now, if you would like to practice your writing yourself, put some of the information and the advice and guidance here into practice, we do offer an IELTS writing correction service. You can also read about that in the bonus lecture that follows this lecture. In any case, I wish you all the best with your upcoming IELTS exams. Thank you for taking the course, and I'll look forward to hearing from you with some hopefully very positive results in the future.